Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
Michael, did you know that our popularity is preceding us because people are now just starting to copy us in their news articles?
Yep. I'm growing a beard and by the time it's fully grown, I expect everyone to be copying us.
Let me see. You're looking.
No, I'm just unshaven.
Okay. Well, it is growing a beard then still. Yeah, we have today found out that and this is what, like 5 days after we record. That this is published. Sorry about that. I need that time to edit it. That Screenrant, the creme de la creme of all website magazines. No, actually, it's about the most clickbaity, crappy place that publishes stuff on the internet.
Which, by the way, we did. In fact, I believe it was Screenrant that we responded to. We spent one whole episode when Dan was on the podcast going over their 8 reasons why Tolkien hasn't held up over the Lord of the Rings held up over the years. So we love them, they love us, and apparently they love us quite a lot.
Helping us. Yeah, so we're gonna take a look at that. They have 8 reasons, and 4 of them are pretty much direct copies from our last week and a half, 2 weeks of changes to the films that we talked about. They just decided they're going to apply those to the Rings of Power. We're going to go over that. Then we're going to take a look at the 4 other ones in our extended podcast. And then we're only going to do one change today. It's we're recording this the night before Thanksgiving, so we have places to go, people to see. In fact, I'm flying out to LA tomorrow, California, San Diego. And we are going to just... Yes, and we are going to just do one change this week. And we will probably get back into doing 2 more next week. And then we will take a break at Christmas. But before we jump into that wonderful article at Screenrant, I want to remind everybody that, 1, we love you if you're a supporter of theonering.com at theonering.com/members. You can become a member and get access to our Discord. You can ask the questions that are so important to you. We just had a nice weekly chat, or monthly chat too, on Saturday. We spent an hour and 45 minutes just talking together, talking about what we thought about the different changes, what new media is out there. We got ideas for people to bring on to interview too. So I have a nice growing list of that.
Very nice.
We'll get a few more people on early next year. And become a member at theonering.com/members. You can download this episode, the extended one, right into your podcast app. And you can get it on YouTube too. We post it into Discord every week. We send out a newsletter about it every week. So do that. All right. So guys, let's
help you.
Help us help you. All right, so here is what I posted to Twitter earlier today. So I said somebody on Screenrant has been listening to our podcast and not giving us credit. Not surprisingly, they're taking our points that we made thoughtfully with deep discussion and dumbing them down to apply them to the Rings of Power. So here in this image that you see, there are the 4 real obvious ones where we talk about the changes here, what is that, 10, 14, 15, and then the full episode of the 17, 18, and 19, where we talk about 1, Sauron is not a big eye, and their change was the Rings of Power make Sauron a more interesting character. 2, Gimli, the comic relief, and then their point is dwarves aren't just comic relief in Rings of Power. So when we say dwarves aren't comic relief in the books, they simply say dwarves aren't comic relief in the Rings of Power. When we say Sauron isn't just a big eye in the books, they say Sauron is a more interesting character in the Rings of Power. When we say Peter Jackson changed Elrond from the books, they say Peter Jackson changed Elrond from the Rings of Power, where obviously. And then lastly, Peter Jackson he ruined Isildur, and our point is that Isildur didn't kill Sauron, and he made him into a lesser character. So anyway, these are the 4 points they made in their article, which I can bring up right here too. And honestly, I take a look at this now, and I feel like this is like 90% AI generated. So they give it a few points they generated, and then they fix a few adjectives.
I think you're right. I think we may actually just be up against AI, in which case this is an edition where we criticize AI. So it's us versus AI. That's our podcast for the next 10 minutes. But if you want to tune in a little more and you are a member, you can join us for the second 4. So they actually have 8 ways. They're trying to, the AI slash geniuses at Screenrant are trying to convince us there are 8 ways in which the Rings of Power does a better job than Peter Jackson. Angel Shaw, sure, why not? Might be a real person, who knows? And so they have 8 reasons, and we'll cover the 4 which look like they were suspiciously copied from our recent episodes, and then with the other 4 we will handle and deal with in our usual fashion, in the members section, the extended section.
Yeah, and I'll put the link for this below if you want to read the entire article too. But I love how they say here that, he wasn't just a big flaming eye, and that Halbrand may be an invention of the series, but he better reflects who Sauron is. This is exactly. Right. He was in love with Galadriel. Tolkien, clearly, that was his intention with Sauron.
Yeah, and he just wanted to be a smith on his own out in the wilds of Numenor,
right,
hammering away. If they had only let him, instead of dragging him to Middle Earth and forcing him to become the Dark Lord or something.
Oh my gosh. It's like they didn't, I mean, I don't think these people actually read the books. They just like looked up Tolkien Gateway and were like, I like these couple sentences, and the Rings of Power is the same thing.
Right. Like you said, probably AI, but basically that factor, that point that stuff. I mean, it is true. Sauron was different in Rings of Power. I'm sorry, in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. But we talked about how basically Peter Jackson had a problem, which was he was up against a Sauron who, in the actual 3 books or 6 books, as you count them, of Lord of the Rings, never appears in physical form, except in the appendices. So he had a problem, and of course he solved that problem with a giant flaming eye at one point, which we take issue with. But be that as it may.
But all right, Halbrand is okay. I will still take the giant flaming eye over freaking Halbrand in the Rings of Power, just to make that clear.
I will too.
I mean, as if that's any better. All right. So the next point is that here they wrote, Elrond was aggressive and distrustful as a result of adding more conflict to the relationship with Aragorn. Right? He was lying and manipulating Arwen to keep her out of harm's way. And the Rings of Power version is more faithful to Tolkien's work, wise, kind, and enduringly good. That enduringly good, that feels like such an AI phrase that they had to say, like, make him sound really even gooder than before. But he's not wise or kind. Maybe he's kind because he's a beta male, but he's wise? Wise in what way? Like that he went to see his friend in like his friend that he hadn't seen since his wedding and missed all his kids' births. I'm talking about, of course, of Durin. I don't know under the why. Like, they make these comments and don't give any like backing fact for it. They just sort of make statements.
Right. No evidence. It's just a claim. The claim is stupid. Elrond is not wise in the Rings of Power. He's not really kind. He's just sort of nice and enduringly good. What temptation to be evil does he have that shows that he's enduringly good? There's nothing. In fact, he kind of manipulate. He's kind of. Tries to convince Galadriel to go off into the west, apparently, which, I mean, I don't know, like, that's, I guess in one way, because Galadriel's so awful, that might be enduringly good. So you can make that I
don't know. Because we make the point, right? We make the point that Elrond simply doesn't believe in men anymore. I wouldn't say he's distrustful of Aragorn. I don't think he doesn't think that Aragorn is false. I think he just doesn't believe that in the films they have to give him a character art and to make him change from the unbeliever to the believer, not the distrustful to the trustful, just doesn't believe that men have it in them. That's different than distrust. So I don't know about it.
I mean, look, they made the same general point that we did, which is that Elrond's character was changed and he was trying to maneuver against Aragorn at first. So that's correct. So good job, ChatGPT 4, I guess.
Yeah, they got that one right. He's different. All right, dwarves aren't just comic relief in the Rings of Power. All right,
this was the worst. It feels like a direct cut from some of our lines that we were talking about.
The comic relief was the exact title that we put into it, and I'm sure they put into ChatGPT like, explain to me why Gimli isn't just the comic relief in the Rings or in the books anymore. to make this point that somehow they're less comic relief in the Rings of Power either. When they have this little, when he's the kissy faced little dwarf, when they have the spat, when they when the kids have the big giant helmets on.
Right. In fact, a lot of the laughter does come from like sort of laughing at the family.
Yeah,
and Disa herself turns out to be, I mean, just in a way, I know this isn't comic relief in one sense, but just sort of comically two-dimensional. Like she's, she goes on one hand from like saying, how much in love she is with her husband, to then the next minute, like actually trying to get him to commit treason and take over the kingdom in the next. It's so plastic. They do in fact seem comical. Durin's temper tantrums are comical during the fourth, and I just
Durin does succeed in doing one thing, and that's getting the meat and getting it raw.
Give me the meat and give it to me raw.
Right, exactly right. Like he has the comic lines. Like that's a comic line. It's an obvious double entendre, which
so bad. Yeah. Okay. First of all, the comic relief in the Lord of the Rings, sure, it was there, but I wouldn't say it was inexpertly done. They put it in places where I think it wasn't like a Marvel movie where there's a ton of tension, then all of a sudden they throw in a comic line. They do a better job of that. I don't know, the Rings of Power. I don't want to rewatch it to figure out my opinion about their timing. But
I think we've gone through it enough. They had a couple good lines, but actually most of the comedy they used it for wasn't actually as funny as it was with Gimli. So I think in fact this point is just unlike the Elrond point, is just totally wrong in the sense that like Rings of Power just doesn't. It actually uses dwarves as comic relief. Like the table scenario where the dwarf is, like every time there's a straight out joke to be told or straight up humor, probably 80% of the time it's a dwarf doing it. Or a dwarf involved. And so, I'm not, I just think they're wrong about this one. We will cover the number 5 in our extended edition, so we can move on from that one.
Orcs look fantastic in the Rings of Power. All right,
do they though? Do they?
Yeah, we'll see. Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings ruined Isildur. Ruined. I don't think we ever used the word ruined, did we?
No, we didn't. What we did say was that Peter Jackson's Isildur wasn't the same character as he was in the books, and the actions he took were different. It was a different. There was just a different. That whole. I mean, one thing is true that Peter Jackson stayed true to the fact that Isildur failed the test of the ring, and kept it for his own, and so that part, accurate with the lore. But a lot of other actions, including him killing Sauron himself, is not lore friendly, as we went over, and so they did change him in that regard. I would argue Rings of Power changes Isildur way more. Like Isildur is not. I do not even see look at these two pictures just for one. I mean, first of all, it shows you the laughable comparison between just the costuming from a movie made in 2000 versus a $1 trillion company making it today. So apparently, Tolkien was right that all civilization trends downward and we're just collapsing because 20 years later they can't even make armor that looks real. And I find that hilarious that they use this picture of Isildur like to make their point that he's supposed to. This is supposedly makes him more like Tolkien's books. Maybe I think that's their point, right?
I guess the idea here they bring up the one idea that we really talked about is that I think it was in our extended podcast where Elrond leads Isildur to Mount Doom, right, to the Samath Noir, where Nar N-A-U-R. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Where he could cast the ring back into the fires of Mount Doom. And they write here specifically, hey, the idea that he would have done that and give it up is entirely unique to Jackson's film. Like, that's exactly the point we make. Clearly, we're not the only ones making the point, but it seems kind of odd that they do this right after we did it a week later.
Yeah, it's not odd at all. I don't believe in this kind of coincidence, especially with AI.
All right, so next one. These are now the ones we'll talk about later. The Rings of Power gives elf characters more variety. And no, you would think they mean the woke variety that they talk about next, which is the Lord of the Rings casting lacked great diversity, or greatly lacked diversity. That's a different one. So we'll find out what they mean exactly about the variety of the elves in this quote.
Well, I mean, actually, I
later.
think spoiler alert for our extended edition, but I'm going to argue that number 2 is absolutely true. Like they're actually 100% correct on this one.
All right.
Middle Earth is more diverse in Rings of Power.
Yes,
it's just not diverse in a good way.
And it covers more Middle Earth stories at once. It's kind of like watching 6 football games at the same time when you're really, you really get to know all those football games at the same time. That's what it feels like when you're watching the Rings of Power. It's 6 different things going on.
And one of them is Pee Wee football.
And none of them are related to the other, in fact. They're all completely separate. They don't really have anything to do with the rest of the story. The Harfoots never have anything to do with anybody else. The Númenóreans barely have anything to do with anybody else.
Here's a screen where we show you a bunch of Pee-wee psychopaths for no reason nobody ever asked for.
All right, guys. Thanks for indulging us in this. We're going to go over that even more in our extended podcast when those 4 changes, those four differences that are simply stupid and ridiculous.
And we should feel, I don't know. Are we supposed to feel like respected because they're yanking from our content?
Yes. No, I do have one thing to bring up, and that is Haley in our YouTube comments made this point about, we talked about power versus immortality. One of the first things that Galadriel says, this was in last week's episode, Galadriel says is that men want power, and she never mentions immortality. And so she said, I appreciate the time and effort you guys put into research the quotes ahead of time in these episodes. So no problem, Haley. We're glad to do it. I can definitely see both sides of the power versus immortality discussion. But there's a quote from letter 203 that really tips me towards Jonathan's perspective. And I will give it. And also John from the Tolkien Road, tolkienroad.com. Go listen to his podcast. It's really good.
And because Jonathan, you sprung this on me, but I came prepared with the book that was sent.
Oh, nice.
So I have letter 203 right in front of me as you said it.
All right. So here's the
begins. There is no
203.
Symbolism or conscious allegory in my story.
But go to the second paragraph and the second to the last sentence. But I should say, if asked, the tale he means here is the Lord of the Rings, because the Silmarillion had not come out yet. The tale is not really about power and dominion. That only sets the wheels going. It is about death and the desire for deathlessness, which is hardly more than to say it is a tale written by a man. So even he said that the important thing about power and immortality. I don't know. Thank you, Haley, because I didn't have that quote. But man, you are Haley has submitted a ton of changes too. So I really appreciate her involvement in getting us on the right foot. But yeah, that's great. That's a great quote. I'm going to make a point of trying to remember that, even though my memory is shot when it comes to
And you think it's a great quote because it was agreeing with you, of course.
Well, no, because I know what Tolkien meant. Some people who read it, just Michael, they just don't.
I just missed the point entirely. That's right. Yeah. So that's. I mean, I think in our conversation, I might have said, in fact, and by might have said, I know I said that the tale of deathlessness and the desire for immortality is actually part of the Númenórean story. So one kind of man is dominated by that, and it is the kind of man that we are most concerned with because. For example, all of the Fellowship, there are only 2 men in the Fellowship, and both of them are at least partial descendants of Númenor, both Boromir and Aragorn. So those are the men we have to deal with, and so it is true to say that that's the case. But I thought a point could be made for power as well. So
yeah. I don't think either are completely wrong. I think that
power in that letter he mentions power and dominion. As
exactly. I think they do go hand in hand. And I think what John said last week, John from the Tolkien Road, tolkienroad.com, said last week that they could have just said, who most of all desire power and long life. That would have been a great little 3-syllable addition to inject what Tolkien said about the Lord of the Rings right here in letter 203, written in 1957 to Herbert Shiro, which is, I don't know, some guy. This was like anyway. All right, guys, we are going to get into our very first and only change this week that we're going to be talking about. And this is Bilbo's prologue.
There and back again. A Hobbit's tale. concerning hobbits. Hobbits must seem of little importance, nor counted among the very wise. Hobbits' only real passion is for food, as we have also developed a keen interest in the smoking of pipeweed. But where our hearts truly lie is in peace and quiet and good-tilled earth. For all hobbits share a love of things that grow. It is no bad thing to celebrate a simple life.
All right. If that was a little weird, it's because I know YouTube keeps dinging me every time I put in video clips from The Lord of the Rings, even if they're less than 8 seconds. So I'm not sure what to do. So if that sounded even weirder to you, it's because I had to edit it after the fact. Okay. Bilbo's Prologue. Bilbo's Prologue is in the extended edition to The Lord of the Rings. In the theatrical edition, the movie starts with Frodo reading with his back up against a tree and Gandalf coming down the rutted road with his wagon. In the extended edition, it starts with Bilbo right at his desk in the red book and giving us the prologue to The Lord of the Rings. Now, what is this prologue from? Actually, it's kind of like what they did is they tried to make the prologue in the film, the prologue that Tolkien wrote in The Lord of the Rings, where he talks about concerning hobbits, right? That's one section of the prologue. Concerning pipeweed, I can't remember the other one concerning pipeweed and smoking of tobacco. There's one concerning about Bilbo's adventure with the ring. I can't remember all the little parts of it, but it divides that up, and it talks about that everything except the ring part. And so I want to read a couple of lines from the prologue, and then kind of counterpoint them to, and as a counterpoint, have what they wrote in the prologue to the film, to the extended edition that you can get. Watch that instead of the theatrical one. It's still better.
Absolutely.
All right. So this is from Concerning Hobbits, where they got Bilbo's prologue. The Shire was divided into 4 quarters. The farthings already referred to, north, south, east, and west, and these again, each into a number of folklands, which still bore the names of some of the old leading families. Although by the time of this history, these names were no longer found only in their proper folklands. And then in the Bilbo's prologue, they wrote, hobbits have been living and farming in the 4 farthings of the Shire for many hundreds of years. So that almost compresses it all down. Quite content to ignore and be ignored by the world of the big folk. So here, Tolkien writes they're the 4 farthings. They still bore the names of some of the old leading families, although by the time of this history, these names were no longer found in their proper folkland. So right there, you get that they shortened it down to say 4 farthings for many hundreds of years, without the details that Tolkien had in there. So I kind of thought that was a good way of condensing what Tolkien wrote. Here's another clip about pipeweed. There is another astonishing thing about hobbits of old that must be mentioned, an astonishing habit. They imbibed or inhaled through pipes of clay or wood the smoke of the burning leaves of a herb, which they called pipeweed or leaf, a variety probably of nicotiana. Anyway, a great deal of mystery surrounds the origin of this particular custom, or art, as the hobbits prefer to call it. And in the prologue in the films, they wrote, as we have also developed a keen interest in the brewing of ales and the smoking of pipeweed. That was a little short, but Tolkien really liked his pipe, so I think he kind of gave him a little bit more due than we might have seen in the films. So the question I think that we have to address is, did they do a good job taking Tolkien's prologue to give us an idea of who hobbits were and making it Bilbo's prologue in the films? That's the question, kind of general, and we'll get down to the specifics of is it lore friendly and do we like it and all that sort of stuff. Do you have any thoughts on that, Michael?
Yeah. So the section of in the beginning, the prologue of Lord of the Rings has 5 sections. It has concerning hobbits, has concerning pipeweed, it has the ordering of the Shire, the finding of the ring, and notes on Shire records. And so what we have in the movie is clearly an attempt to highly truncate a couple of those, which is concerning hobbits and concerning pipeweed, into a few sentences. They ignore the ordering of the Shire entirely. They ignore the finding of the ring, which is intended in the books to give us a synopsis of Bilbo's trip in The Hobbit. So they don't try to sum up that in the movie version. And they ignore on the Shire records. So they only actually touch on 2 of the 5 sections in the prologue. And so what I would say is, I mean, they're just, the extended edition is just trying to put in something which gives homage, in my opinion, to the prologue in the book, and briefly introduces us in the same manner that Tolkien was trying to introduce us in a literary way, briefly introduces us cinematically to the idea of hobbits and what makes them different. Interestingly enough, you know, a lot of people, and this is just a side note, you know, hobbits are clearly on the metaphysical plane, they're clearly a sub race of men. They are actually not, they're not a dwarf and they're not an elf, and they're not even their own new thing in that sense. In Tolkien's Legendarium, I mean, they are a new thing in the sense that they're a sub race of men, but there is a kind of mystery to them, in the sense that when in the Silmarillion you have basically nothing about them, and so in most of his other books, and so they were kind of this shoehorn in a way. They were a literary shoehorn because he had written a book called The Hobbit, and so he had to shoehorn them in. I was glad. I remember seeing this for the first time, the extended edition for the first time, and I thought, oh, that's cool. They've put in a few lines about, giving a homage to Tolkien's effort. Do I think they did it justice? No, but in a way, I don't know that they could have. How long do you want this to be? So anyway, we'll get into that when we talk about the rating.
It's sort of like the appendix for the Hobbits comes before the books. Yeah, let's get into our changes then, what we think about this here. So the first question, as is usual, is it lore friendly? Okay, I'm going to make a point here that they talk about, let's see. It has been remarked by some hobbits that hobbits' only real passion is for food, as we have also developed a keen interest in the brewing of ales. But have they? I guess maybe they like food and pipeweed. So, okay, true. And then he writes, but where our hearts truly lie is in peace and quiet and good tilled earth, which, yeah, sure. I mean, in fact, as Michael pointed out to me earlier, good tilled earth is a quote directly from the third paragraph of concerning hobbits, where, do you have a quote in front of you?
It says, hobbits are an unobtrusive but a very ancient people, more numerous formerly than they are today, for they love peace and quiet and good tilled earth. A well-ordered and well-farmed countryside was their favorite haunt.
Well-ordered. Does that mean they just had straight plow lines?
Yeah, I mean, order when it comes to land, because that's what it's talking about. It has to do with boundaries and stewardship of the earth, I guess, in an ancient sense,
right? Which does tie with what Tolkien thought, right? He hated the machinery, he hated the encroachment of cities onto the countryside,
right?
All right, and okay, so
and it says it also points out that they it says their faces were as a rule good-natured rather than beautiful, broad, bright-cheeked, red-eyed, red-cheeked, with mouths apt to laughter and to eating and drinking. And laugh they did, and eat, and drink, often and heartily, being fond of simple jests at all times, and of 6 meals a day when they could get them.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they love food, but maybe their real passion, they have a lot of real passions. Food is just one of them.
Right. Yeah, that whole thing. I always felt like the line that they give in the movie, where they said their real love was for food. That's a stretch. That's not anything. I mean, when you read the prologue from Tolkien, you get a sense of lots of their loves, and of which, like you said, Jonathan, one of them was eating. But that just seemed like more of a setup for some of the jokes in the movie,
which is probably one of my least favorite jokes, which is the whole lembas way bread, and then Legolas says to them, one bite will sustain you for an entire day. And Pippin says to Merry, or is it Merry to Pippin? I can't remember. He's like, how many did you eat? He's like, 2 or something like that. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. You just minimized way bread. Yeah.
So that was, there was one food joke about what about second breakfast. That was funny. I laughed at.
That was good.
I laughed at that.
Yeah. All right. Is it lore friendly? Yes, I believe it is lore friendly. I don't think he does anything that's really anti Tolkien lore in the prologue.
Right. The purists like us wish it were longer, but it was indeed lore friendly.
Yeah. No issues there. All right. Next question. Does the change make for better cinema?
Well, in this case, it's an interesting one, right? Because it's the extended edition only. So in this case, I'm looking at, does it make for better cinema? Clearly, they cut it from the first piece of cinema, which was on the screen, and then they added it the second one. So they thought it made it somewhat better.
That's
somehow.
a good point.
And the answer, and so my answer to that actually is yes, it does, because it actually adds in something that was missing from the first round in the theaters, which is pretty cool. Which is teaching us a little bit about hobbits beforehand.
Yeah. The question then also is does it make for better cinema to have it be longer or to not have it at all? And I feel like they made a good decision for not making it longer and talking about a lot of the other details that Tolkien put into his prologue that is kind of unnecessary. You still want to discover the characters through what they do, not by being told who they are.
Right.
It's boring when somebody says they love each other. Like, no. You show us how they love each other in the same way. You show us how they like to farm. You show us that they do some
don't just
of that.
tell us.
Yeah.
Yep. You know what's funny is I've always thought, and this is just a random side note, but I've always thought that that the prologue, as I've read it and reread it, and I actually don't read the prologue every time to my kids. I think I read it every other or third time. But because when they're very young, if I'm reading to a particularly young batch of kids, they have very little patience for the prologue.
Totally.
But I've always thought that the prologue was kind of sort of Tolkien's notes, where he was getting those creative juices going. You know how Tolkien used to discover his stories, not plan them out. So the more he talks about hobbits from his notes and the more he develops them, the more he can, I think, get a feel and discover more of their story. And so I always felt like that was sort of Tolkien revving his engine, so to speak, on the Hobbit side of the story. But could be wrong.
I'd be curious to see how much of that he wrote like right before it was published too, or how much because I know he was spending a lot of time on those notes in the appendices before the return. I guess it was maybe just before the Return of the King came out. I can't remember the details of that timeline, but yeah, he was spending a lot of time on those notes and appendices because one, he wanted to make them also match up with what he had in the Silmarillion, and so he slaved over those to make sure that was
right.
it, and it was also changing the Silmarillion at the time, or his Histories of Middle-earth.
But concerning hobbits, has got nothing to do with the Silmarillion. So that's just, to me, that just feels like another thing. Like he had the Silmarillion, which he slaved over the appendices to make them fit, and then he had the Hobbit, and he slaved over the prologue to make the Hobbit fit with
and he knew great minds like the writer's room at Amazon would come in and fill in those spaces of where hobbits were in the Second Age that he didn't have time to do. So
you know what I missed in the prologue was the part where they were psychopaths and they would leave their own kind to die on the road.
That's right.
He didn't mention that, which Tolkien just had a missed opportunity. Clearly that's the kind of people that these folks are is the kind that would leave their own kind because they get a wheel stuck in a rut or something.
Oh man. Changing the holy text, Joseph Smith. Okay, so oh man. All right. How much do you like the change? I'm gonna say with this one, this might be one of the best changes because I think he captures the hobbits really well without beating us over the head about who they are and exactly what they do, but it's a few short phrases. Now, the prologue, which we'll get into in the next episode or two, the prologue in the theatrical edition, the original edition, starts with Frodo and meeting Gandalf, and they put a little bit of that in when they have a little interplay between the two of them.
Yep.
But I think in here, it really gives us a good sense of the hobbits, and I think it was completely worthwhile. How much do I like the change, man? I think it might be his best. I'm going to give it a solid 4.9. I think it was a great change because to put the whole prologue in would have not been.
So this is the kind of thing where, because I have no complaints about this one at all. I mean, maybe their one great love is food. That's a little bit of a stretch, but it's just so good. This whole thing is so good. It is literally this change, because it's a change from the theatrical to the extended edition. This change is literally, in my mind, bringing more Tolkien into the movie.
That's a good way of putting it.
And so because they're bringing more Tolkien to the movie, I asked myself when I was thinking about this change, like, if this isn't a 5, what is a 5? So I'm going to give it a 5. So
wow. Okay. I was close. I
think 4.9 is pretty much the same.
Yeah. I'm just leaving myself just in case there's something that we go across that I do like better.
No worries.
And if not, I can live with myself with never giving this movie a 5.
there
okay
are no
with that.
perfect scores in Jonathan's mind.
No,
no one can get an 8
never.
plus.
All right, good. Wow. Hey, that was great. Look, guys, we love the films. See? In fact,
Totally.
I will say, by the time that if this would have been the prologue that I saw in the theaters, I would have probably started off on a better foot. Then honestly, I will say Frodo's awkward smile when he hears Gandalf.
I've thought that a lot about the extended editions. I wish so much the extended editions would have been in the theater. I mean, you could have even. I know this is not work from a corporate and revenue perspective, but as a fan, I would have loved it. It's like, here's the version if you want to go see just a long movie, and here's the version if you're an actual fan. Yeah. And the limited release in a few theaters, and I would have been happy with that.
Yeah, but back then, remember, it was actually still film that they had to send out everywhere. They didn't have digital projectors to just like send the files around. That's true. Was all film, and true. So they couldn't really do that easily. It would take a lot more work, and that's why I think now you do see some, a lot of more special editions coming out in the films or even longer films because it's easier to spread those around. All right, guys.
Can't argue.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to jump into our extended episode on this briefer show today. We're going to talk about those 4 changes and jump right into it. If you have any questions, please become a member. Go to thewarning.com/member. You can ask them in Discord every week before we record. We do remind you guys to submit any questions that you have. And hopefully, you like us enough to do that because we love you guys, right? Except for Michael.
We love all of you, but we love the members more. So goodbye, freeloaders.